Billionaire Lifestyle Podcast listeners, how amazing is Emmett? Do you love this show? Of course you do. And if you're getting something from this, I've got to tell you about my show, the Do A Day Podcast. I'm Brian Falchuk, and every week I bring you another guest who's got an inspiring story of overcoming some serious challenge in their life that they've learned from, grown from, and now they're here to share their story to help inspire you to live a better life every day. If that sounds exciting, come and check the show out at doadaypodcast.com. You can also find the Do A Day Podcast on all your favorite podcasting apps like iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and more. Just go to doadaypodcast.com and check the show out today.
Welcome to the Billionaire Lifestyle Podcast with your host, Emmett Muckles. Please visit iTunes, Stitcher, or emmettmuckles.com to listen to all the episodes for free.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Billionaire Lifestyle Podcast. Today, my guest is Patricia Hammond-Gonzalez, and we are talking across that great body of water. She is in Spain, I am in the Midwest, and we are going to talk today about the ultimate experience. Patricia, how you doing today?
I'm doing great, thank you. I'm in a new day. You're still in the 13th. I'm in the 14th.
That's right. That's absolutely true. But that's awesome. You know, a lot of times I spend at least once a year or every 15 months I have to go to Europe to visit my in-laws, and I am always excited when I'm there because of just a slightly different culture from the United States. But let's get back to you.
Yes, okay, great.
You were born in Spirit Lake, Idaho, which is near Spokane, Washington. What was your journey? How did you end up in Spain from Idaho?
Oh my gosh. That is quite a story. Right, I was. My father was from Idaho, his family, and my mother was from England. They met during World War II, and when the war was over, she ended up in Idaho, and so there you go. I think it's kind of interesting. You know, my whole life has been a spiritual path, and there I was born in Spirit Lake, Idaho. I think it's perfect.
So were you right by that big lake that's in Spirit Lake, Idaho?
Well, we left there, and I grew up actually in Washington State, so I don't remember too much about Spirit Lake. My grandparents lived in Bayview, Idaho, which was right out of Coeur d'Alene. So if you know the area, northern Idaho, Coeur d'Alene is the big lake.
I've been to Idaho once, and it was extremely cold.
Oh, yeah, it's very cold. Well, you're not too far from Canada. It's cold.
Okay, so what led you away from Washington? Because, you know, you've done a lot of things in your life. You've had a working career. You've raised some children. You've got siblings. So all your core experiences are here in the United States, but something was calling you. And tell me about your journey.
Okay, well, so I was raised in Washington State. When I was still in high school, a senior, there's 4 girls, 4 sisters, and the 2 older ones had left the house, and my mother and my sister and I came to California. So I actually finished high school in California and lived there until I was about 20. So a very short time, but I actually went to London for a year to work.
Wow.
When I was 20 years old. And there I met my first husband, and I lived in London for 4 years, and then he and by then I had my daughter, we immigrated to the States. And so I was in the States in California with him for several years, and then I ended up in the San Francisco Bay Area where I was now a single woman. And that's where my career was, in San Francisco mostly. And I worked in a corporate environment in sales and marketing for many years, about 20 years, lived in Marin County.
Oh, that's nice. I just came from there.
Yeah, that's a lovely area. That's where my home was. And so this is where the story really begins for me, because like I said, I had been on a spiritual path for many, many years, but it was more of a hobby. I read all the books, went to retreats, lectures, but I had a full-time career, and I had a house, a mortgage, and I had a life that I couldn't really leave for a spiritual life. So I was in my home early morning, and my two cats were fiddling around at my screen door. And the alarm had not gone off, so I was kind of mad at them. So I got up to see what the fuss was all about, and there was a bat hanging on the outside of my screen. And I had lived there for almost 20 years. I had never seen a bat before. And so I believe in totem animals, so I looked it up, and it said major life changes ahead.
Uh-oh.
Yeah. So I go to the office in San Francisco. It's a bus ride. I get to the office, and an hour later, they called me into human resources, and I got laid off that day.
Don't you hate when that happens?
Well, I thought about the bat.
That's good. At least you had a precursor. You had a precognition like, this is going to be all right. It's just change.
Well, I was actually quite happy about it because the career, it had served its purpose, and I was kind of done with it. Yeah. So I was actually happy for about 12 hours, and then I woke up the next morning, and I felt like I was smothering in reality, because it felt like, oh my gosh, I have a mortgage, I have bills, now what,
Yeah.
And so for about a year, I worked temp jobs to pay my bills. And then one day I just had so much stress. And my heart was beating out of my chest, and I took some deep breaths, and all of a sudden the message was, this is the time to get on that spiritual path.
Awesome.
And so I had an intuitive thought. I called up my mother, who lived in Fresno, and I said, can I come live in your second bedroom? And she said, sure. And so I went, I rented my home. I packed all my stuff in the kind of the basement of the house, and I headed to Fresno with my two cats. I slept on a blow-up mattress. The room was very stark. I treated it like it was my cocoon, and I started heavy-duty meditation and searching the internet and asking, what should I be doing? And I was guided to go back to my home in Marin and go under the house and dig out my book, A Course in Miracles.
Wait. You said dig out your book, A Course in Miracles. You still had the place, but you were renting it out, but you still had some things there, correct?
Yes, I still had things. All of my things I had put underneath the house.
Ah.
Because it's a 4-story house.
Oh.
So they had 3 levels, and the underneath was where I stored my things.
Got you. So you grabbed the book, and then
I started reading it. I had studied it 20 years earlier. It didn't make any sense to me, so I put it in a box and didn't touch it again. And now this time I read it, and it made sense. I saw forgiveness on every page. And I started the practice of A Course in Miracles, forgiveness. It took 2 years of just constant forgiveness. And of course, there I was with my mother, so who better to practice forgiveness on than the woman who raised me, right?
Right.
And that's where all my family lived. We had all moved down from Washington State. All my sisters were in Fresno, my mother. So who better to be involved with than my family for this forgiveness work? And I thought I would be there maybe 6 months, but it was 4 years. So I had a lot of forgiveness work to do, as you can imagine.
Yeah, I mean, life generates these things.
Yeah.
And sometimes we take on the total negative, but it's like the principle, the 7 principles. For every action, there's a reaction. And sometimes you have to go to a negative so that when you experience that positive, you can really hone in on it and be appreciative of it.
Well, it was changing my life. Miracles were happening in my life on a daily basis, but nobody in my immediate circle shared any of my beliefs. So it was all something I kept within myself. It was really a cocoon that I was in. I didn't work. I just stayed there. I did my work in my forgiveness and, very little social life. It was really, really just bared my soul.
So during this time, how did you keep yourself sustainable? Was it at the grace of your family that kept you, fed and clothed, and because you had moved away from, everything that you had built and did a reset?
Well, my sister was the CFO of a small medical supplies company, and she would bring me in to do some temp work now and again. So I would get money in that way, but it was very temporary. So most of the hours were not spent in the office.
Right.
Most of the hours I had to myself. My mother, I didn't pay rent with my mother. I did take on a couple of bills to help her, but pretty much she was very generous, very helpful. She didn't follow the path, but she had always understood my need to be on it, She was very supportive. She was very, very helpful in that way. So what happened after 2 years of this constant forgiveness, I had another intuitive thought, and I asked, okay, what's next for me? And I got this message back that said, what is my purpose? So I asked, what is my purpose? And the next thing you know, this book was starting to come. And I saw pictures, I saw dialogue, I call it on my mental screen. It just unfolded. And I was horrified because I wasn't a writer. I'm a communicator. I've been a trainer. But I communicate verbally. Yeah. Not through, written words.
And that can be difficult too, because we process words much faster than we process them with our fingers or writing them down. That's one of the problems I have. Did you suffer from that too? Like learning how to go from a verbal communication to a written oral communication?
It was very difficult because I think when we speak in short sentences. It's not so descriptive. And when you write, you really have to take the reader to that place and let them feel like they're with you. And I lacked that. I didn't have that skill. So I had to learn that. But, so anyway, I started writing it down, and I looked around for people who I knew were writers, thinking maybe they would write it for me. I would tell them what to put, and they would write it, but nobody stepped up. So I just thought, okay, well, I'm just going to do it. So I started writing it. It took a year to write it. I got another message, okay, put the book down, it's finished, and now build a blog. So I started building a blog. The book sat on my hard drive, unattended. And so after 4 years of being with my mother, a friend in Marin County asked me if I could come back to live in her home for a month while she went to a yoga retreat in India. And I thought, okay, well, it's now time to go. I have done all the work with the family. I'm ready to move on now. And so I left and went back to Marin, and I ended up back in my home and building my blog. So the book actually sat on my hard drive for 7 years.
Wow.
And I spent all my time pretty much writing for my blog and coaching, and then one day I had property in Mexico, and one day the realtor said, I have a buyer for your property, and I sold the property, and I just knew that the money was meant to publish the book. It was time. Its time had come. So that's my journey. That's what happened.
So you wrote your book as a nonfiction, but you also said it's got a unique proposition. It's got a twist to it. What do you mean by that for a self-help book? Because there's thousands of self-help books.
Right. It's a self-help book, a spiritual self-help book, but it's a novel. It's about an adventure. It's about when the student is ready, the teacher will appear. It's about characters. It's about a journey. And it's about two American women who are studying A Course in Miracles together. And one of them says, let's leave our comfort zone and let's go out and see if the practice works out in the world. And our first destination was Paris, and that was the only destination. From there, we would see what would happen. The characters would see what would happen. And on the first night, Savannah, one of the American women, meets Jose Miguel on the streets of Paris, and his name is Joey, and he's homeless, and the book is really a metaphor for what we're all doing. We're all on a journey to go home to our Father's house.
Yeah, buddy.
And that's what Joey does. He left his home in Barcelona, his father's home, and after 2 years of being on the streets in Paris, he wants to go back home. So it's a metaphor for the larger picture of going home to our Father's house. And so Savannah teaches him the forgiveness and changes his life. And so what you're doing is you're watching their adventure, you're watching through her lessons, him evolve.
So you have a book that really puts you on the path. As many of us do, there's some piece of literature that gives us an aha moment. Yours was The Course in Miracles. Mine was a series of books and things that happen. How is it that A Course in Miracles for you and its teachings, how did you wrap that as the main theme? You really probably pulled spiritually from it, but were you able to convey that to the audience?
Well, I just understood when I read A Course in Miracles. Yes, there's so many words and it can be so complicated to read. But I read between the lines the practice of forgiveness. And what it's really saying is there is nothing outside of our minds. We create our world through our thoughts. And it's a whole new way of thinking. And once you understand the belief that there is nothing outside of our mind, that our thought is creating our world, then you start the process of being the observer of your world, and then you forgive your thoughts that created that anger, that created that feeling of being a victim, that unworthiness. You realize that you don't react to the world. You take it as a reflection of your thinking.
Because there's several books, but one that rings mine is the Kabbalion, which says the universe is mental and the all is mind. And that's what you're kind of reinforcing here, that everything we experience is stuff that we need in this journey internally, and we project it outward, or it's a reflection of something that we are participating in.
everything, you really have two choices. I guess I could go back thinking about an infant. An infant, although we don't have the capacity to see the love and light of God in a newborn baby, it's there. We can sense it. It's there. It never leaves. But what happens is, as we age, we take on learned behavior from our parents, from our environment, from our culture, from our religion, from our schools, from our television programs that we watch. We learn this behavior. And so we just take on these layers and layers and layers of learned behavior. And the love and light of God is still with us, but it's covered over with all this learned behavior. So when you wake up in the morning, if you're not purposefully asking for God to be present, then you're in default mode probably, and you're going to go out into the world in this learned behavior. Mm. So the forgiveness work is really saying, what I'm doing here is I am undoing all these layers and I'm getting back to the love and light of God.
That's, and I wish so many people could really own and conceptualize that fact, just to forgive, because, we make things that are really not that important. We give them a great deal of weight and we keep them in our being, and they weight us down and prevent us from living the free life that we should. So, I commend you on extracting that. And the reason I say this is because someone is going to resonate with you. They may have read 1,000 books, but they may get your book and go, "Oh, I get it now." So where can people obtain the book?
Well, the book is on Amazon in ebook and also, hard copy. So it's available on Amazon. It's in bookstores, Barnes & Noble. I'm not sure how many bookstores are still out there, but it was on Barnes & Noble website as well.
Yep.
It's doing quite well, but, it's a book that, you're right, you have to be ready to embrace this kind of belief system, because it's a whole new way of looking at life. It's a whole new way of looking at the world.
So now that you've written this book, what else do you have in store? Do you have speaking? Do you have workshops? Are you interacting with people, or are you doing book readings? What's in store for you in the next 12 to 18 months of your life? What's your journey going forward?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question, because I asked that of myself again. I said, okay, so now what? Just like I did the first time. And what happens is I ask that question, and then usually when I lay down to sleep, the answer comes. So I jump up and I go right to the computer, and the answer came, and I am now 30,000 words into my second book.
Do you have a title for said book already?
It's part of the Joey series. I didn't quite know if I was going to write a second book. I thought it was going to be about my relationship with my husband, which was a result of me writing the book in a miraculous, serendipitous meeting. But no, it turns out I was totally surprised, and it's Joey again, but it again has a twist. It's not the same Joey, it's a different Joey. But it's a very, very interesting concept that my ego mind could not have created. It had to come from a higher place.
I like how you said my ego mind could not create this. This came from much higher vibration.
It could not have thought of it. So I knew that it was meant to be book 2, and I immediately sat down and started writing, and within no time, even my publisher says, you've already got 30,000 words, and I only started 6 weeks ago.
Wow.
So I don't know how many books will be in the series, but it's called a Joey series because the guy's name is Joey. And it's the same teaching. because I think that for me, it's the truth. It's the only way to live your life, is to take responsibility for your thoughts.
Awesome.
And to forgive them.
Awesome.
And so I just think however many times I have to say it, I'm open for it. And I totally understand that why I was chosen, because at the beginning, I couldn't imagine myself writing a book. But what I have learned is that the reason I wrote the book is because I totally, totally believe in the power of forgiveness.
Now that's a good one.
I'm the best person to write about it.
Awesome. So were there some things that happened, and this is the last question I'm going to have, second to the last. Were there some things in your life that spurred a lot of resentment towards other people in the way they treated you or their interactions with you?
In my life from childhood up? Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, just in your life in general, up until the point when you began to have your spiritual epiphany. Were there...
Well, I'm the third daughter of 4,
Ooh.
so right there is a bad place to be. I was raised in a house of alcoholism and abuse.
Yeah.
Physical abuse. I was the rebellious black sheep of the family, and I understood early on that there was something different, but I couldn't quite put a finger on it as a child, and even as a teenager. It wasn't until I hit my 30s that actually it was my mother who handed me a book, Out on a Limb by Shirley MacLaine. She said, I can't get into this, maybe you'll like it. And I read it, and it just, started me on the path. And from that point on, I couldn't get enough of the, smorgasbord of spiritual practices. I just studied everything.
Yeah, I remember that book too. So what's the last... I do. I remember it was in the 80s when I remember seeing that. So what would you leave the Billionaire Lifestyle audience with? If you could give out one thing, what would you tell them?
Well, what I would say is you're not going to find happiness by changing jobs or by moving to another city or by buying a car or, divorcing your spouse and getting another one. Happiness is an inside job, and it's there, it's waiting for you, but you've got to do the work to find it. But it's inside.
Okay.
That's what I say.
So there's one last thing that I always do with my guests on the Billionaire Lifestyle. So you have to close your eyes. I can't see you, so I'm going to have to trust you on this. So you have to close your eyes, and you have to picture yourself hanging out in your home, wherever that may be. And you are by yourself, totally alone, and you're saying, maybe I'm just going to sit here on the couch and I'm going to relax. And then all of a sudden you hear a knock at the door, and you get up and wonder, who is this? And you open up the door, and it's your 17-year-old self. And they say to you, that yourself says to you, your young self says, what do you have for me to get through these times?
Yeah. The word faith came to me.
You said faith?
Faith.
Awesome.
I have such faith. I have had difficult times, but I've always found faith. And I know that there's a power within me that is guiding me. And so, sometimes it's hard to surrender to that faith, and you fight and fight and fight. But eventually I do surrender to it, and it guides me well.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you
so much. It's been such a pleasure.
Well, Patricia, don't be a stranger. Find me on Facebook.
Can I send you my book? Would you like to read it?
I would love to read your book. I would be absolutely ecstatic. And then
I would be happy to send you a copy.
Yes, and then I will pay it forward to someone so that it spreads. So, ladies and gentlemen, this is how I end the show. Remember, when you get out the shower, take some time to drop the towel, be as the almighty creator of the universe, the omniverse, made you, and just lavish in your beauty, lavish in your glory, and then wipe the fog off the glass and get close to the glass. Get really close so that you can study your face, because that is where it all starts to attract. But in the middle of your chest is where it all resonates. And there are these little beams of light that are through your body, but I want you to pay attention to your face, because that's the first thing we typically notice on another human being. Get close and look at your eyeballs, because they're like little galaxies. As above, so below. You are a fractal portion of the universe. You are part of the one. And I want you to simply look at how beautiful all that is. You are a miracle. 30 days after one cell met another cell and they began to multiply, you were a billionaire. So you go live the billionaire lifestyle. You're already rich. You were born that way. Now, act upon it. Till next time, love you all. Peace. Thank you, Patricia.
Thank you, Emmett. Have a great day.
Thank you.